HAZMAT is a self-reflection and conversation game about hazardous aspects of our lives, developed by Affinity Games.
Currently, there are two HAZMAT decks based on the topics of masculinity and the current pandemic. The game has print-to-play versions that we offer for free to players. Players can also submit their ideas for card prompts on the game's website. Players can use this game to reflect on and/or have a dialogue about hazardous norms, feelings, thoughts, and actions related to these topics, how you and others may have dealt with and/or reproduced them, and how perhaps you could feel, think, or act differently.
We've also open sourced our design tools and process for the game, so now others can make their own HAZMAT decks about other hazardous aspects of our lives.
Caution. There is a content warning here. Because this game is about toxicity and ethics, there will be content and words that are offensive and challenging, because people and life can be challenging too.
Now, many games use conversation as a mechanic, but rarely do people call these games conversation games. Usually they're just called party games or icebreaker games. We, in all our games, have tried to push this mechanic to produce really real conversations. Less debate, less icebreaker, less playing to the judge, more conversation, dialogue and deliberation, more depth and connection, self-expression and self-exploration.
Dialogue is a process that allows people, usually in small groups, to share their perspectives and experiences with one another about difficult issues we tend to just debate or avoid entirely. Deliberation is a closely related process with a different emphasis. Deliberation emphasizes the importance of examining options and trade-offs to make better decisions.
Dialogue and deliberation processes tend to use skilled facilitators and carefully constructed ground rules or agreements to ensure that all participants are heard and are treated as equals. We do not have a facilitated gameplay mode, though therapists and facilitators can use the game in that way. Instead, we use a code of conduct to help players self-manage the dialogue and the social dynamics of play.
Yeah, we know. No one likes to talk about ethics.
Currently, there is a single-player gameplay mode and a multiplayer mode. Players can also experiment and submit their own ways to play.
There are three types of cards in HAZMAT: hazardous sites, hazardous materials, and HAZMAT suits.
Hazardous sites are situations or events where you may face some element of the hazardous theme you are exploring.
Hazardous materials are prompts to reflect on how you or others have felt, thought, acted in the past. This is our baggage. It's the stuff we carry with us through life. And they add another layer of hazardousness or hazardosity to the site.
And finally, HAZMAT suits are could prompts that ask players to consider a different way to think, feel, act about these hazardous materials and sites going forward that may protect them and perhaps others.
There are four types of sites, suits, and materials based on the hazardous material identification system: explosive, flammable, corrosive, and toxic. Players don't have to match suits when playing, but they often go together. We use it for a scale of hazardousness for player emotions, thoughts, and actions. The game was inspired by an Atlantic article written by Peggy Orenstein, drawing on her book on young men and masculinity. It made us really sad, and then really mad, and so we made a horrible thing. You're welcome. Enjoy playing it.
The hazardous sites and the hazmat suits were inspired by the French philosopher Michel Foucault's writings on the Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece, and a certain technology of the self they called ascesis, or aesthetic practices. Ascesis means the progressive consideration of the self, a remembering, but also a mastery over oneself, obtained not through renunciation or suppression of feelings or reality, but through the acquisition and assimilation of truth. Its final aim is to access the reality of this world and to prepare for it. Quote, it's a set of practices by which one can acquire, assimilate, and transform truth into a permanent principle of action. They include exercises in which the subject puts himself in a situation in which he can verify whether he can confront events and use the discourses with which he is armed. It is a question of testing and preparation, end quote.
One ascetic exercise related to ascesis is melete, meaning meditation. Not this kind of meditation, not that there's anything wrong with it. Melete is the work one undertakes by thinking over useful terms and arguments. It is a matter of anticipating the real situation through dialogue in one's thoughts. One judges the reasoning one should use in an imaginary exercise. It's a let us suppose, in order to test an action or an event. For example, how would I react? Imagining the articulation of possible events to test how one would react, that is meditation. And that is ethical imaginary play.
We take the model of Melete of the Stoics described by Foucault a bit further. We added the hazardous materials cards to prompt critical reflection about how players have struggled and felt, thought, acted in the past in a similar sort of situation. These are their personal hazardous materials they carry inside them and should handle with care. They can also extend the ethical imaginary play of Melete by adding extra hazardousness to the site being played.
So now we're going to demo the single player mode, which we simply call meditation. First, you separate the hazardous site, suit, and material cards. Then the player selects a hazardous site card to consider for the round. Then they select a hazardous material card, and then a HAZMAT suit that to them is applicable to the hazardous site in play. Players then meditate on, in this Greek Stoic sense, the cards, reflecting on how their past and present connects with the cards selected. They can imagine themselves having been in this situation in the past. How could they have done better with the help of a HAZMAT suit? What hazardous materials are they dealing with? How would they do better if they encountered this situation in the future? This can be an internal dialogue or journaling or possibly expressed to a therapist.
Now we'd like to demo the multiplayer mode called Accidents, Incidents, and Disasters. Similar to meditation, in Accidents, Incidents, and Disasters, we separate the three types of cards. The player with the next birthday starts, so that would be me. Similar to meditation, player one selects the site, material, and suit card of their choosing. Then they read them aloud and express their thoughts about them, as with meditation. After which, other players can give their feedback or respond to player one, offer their own thoughts about the cards drawn, and dialogue and deliberation can emerge. Then it is up to the players to navigate play with the help of the code of conduct. We don't have time, unfortunately, to get into a hard conversation here for this video. You need more than 10 minutes for that. After dialogue has winded down, player one returns their cards to the deck and passes the deck clockwise, and that player repeats the process.
And that's HAZMAT. We hope it makes hard conversations a little bit easier.
We hope you enjoyed our video and looking at our hard, horrible game.
It's not hard in a Dark Souls kind of way, unless you mean looking into the darkness of your soul. And that's what HAZMAT is for.
Cards Against Toxicity, Conversation for Humanity.
Thanks for listening. Go have a hard conversation and give us your feedback.
We are Affinity Games, and this has been HAZMAT.